His K9 tore open a cabin wall. What they found inside exposed a secret powerful men had killed to keep buried. Snow choked the Wyoming mountains as Dylan Mercer, a homeless former Navy SEAL, stepped into the cabin he never wanted. The air felt wrong, too still, too watchful. Then Coda froze, growling low before clawing into the wall like he'd found something alive behind it. Dylan followed, and everything changed. Comment 1 or 0, and tell us where you're watching from. The wind came first. It moved through the Wyoming mountains like something alive, slipping between the jagged peaks and pouring down into the narrow valley where the cabin stood alone. Snow followed behind it, thin at first, then thicker, swirling across the frozen clearing in restless spirals. The trees creaked under the pressure, their branches bowing and snapping back like strained bones. Out here, the world didn't whisper, it watched. Inside the cabin, darkness held everything in place. The fire in the stone hearth had burned down to embers hours ago, leaving only a faint orange glow that pulsed weakly against the walls. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards, crawling up the furniture, pooling in the corners where the light couldn't reach. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, carrying the scent of old wood, ash, and something older, something sealed away for too long. Dylan Mercer slept on the narrow couch near the fire, still wearing his jacket, boots resting on the edge of the rug. Sleep hadn't come easy. It never did. Even in exhaustion, his body refused to let go completely, his mind hovering just beneath the surface, alert to every shift in sound. Beside him, Coda lay stretched along the floor. The German shepherd's breathing was slow, controlled, but his ears never relaxed. Even in stillness, he was listening to the wind, to the cabin, to everything beyond it. Then it changed. Coda's head lifted in a single, sharp motion. His ears snapped forward, locking onto something unseen. A low growl formed deep in his chest, not loud, not frantic, but deliberate, focused. Dylan's eyes opened instantly. No confusion, no hesitation. Years of training didn't fade, they waited. "What is it?" he whispered, his voice rough, barely more than breath. Coda didn't look at him. The dog rose slowly, muscles tightening beneath his coat, every movement controlled, his gaze fixed on the far wall near the fireplace, the same wall Dylan had barely noticed when he first entered the cabin. Just another section of aged wood, just another piece of a forgotten home. But Coda saw something else. The growl deepened. Dylan pushed himself upright, his body already reacting before his thoughts could catch up. His hand moved automatically to the flashlight, clipped at his belt. The small click as it turned on sounded louder than it should have, in the silence. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the room until it landed on the wall. Nothing. Just wood. Old. Worn. Still. But Coda stepped forward, slow at first, then faster. And then, scratch. The sound tore through the cabin. Sharp. Violent. Precise. Coda's paw struck the wood again, claws digging in with controlled force, not random, not frantic, each movement targeted, intentional. Scratch. Scratch. Dylan froze, his chest tightened, breath catching halfway in. That wasn't behavior. That was training. "What do you have?" Dylan murmured, rising to his feet. Coda didn't stop. He shifted his stance, pressing his nose against the surface, inhaling deeply, then striking again harder this time. The wood gave a faint, hollow echo. Dylan heard it. Not the scratching. The echo. His pulse spiked. Hollow. His mind snapped into place. He moved closer, boots heavy against the floorboards, every step measured. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as he brought it closer to the wall. Up close, the surface looked no different than the rest of the cabin-aged planks, slightly uneven, worn by time. But now that he was looking for it, there, a seam, so faint it could have been missed entirely. Dylan reached out slowly, his fingers brushing along the wood. Cold, solid, but beneath it, something wasn't right. Coda stopped scratching. The dog stepped back just enough to look at Dylan, his eyes sharp, unwavering, waiting. The same look he used overseas. The same look that meant, "You see it now." Dylan swallowed hard. His breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, but tight. The kind of breathing that came before something broke. "You knew," Dylan whispered. Coda's ears flicked, but he didn't move. The wind outside slammed against the cabin, rattling the windows hard enough to make the glass shudder. For a moment, the entire structure groaned, as if the mountain itself was pressing down on it. Dylan ignored it. His focus narrowed to a single point, the wall. He ran his hand along the seam again, pressing slightly this time. Nothing moved, no give, no obvious mechanism, but the hollow sound lingered in his mind. There was space behind it. He stepped back, scanning the area quickly. His training kicked in fully now, assessing angles, structure, weaknesses. His eyes moved across the room, cataloging everything. The dresser. It sat just off to the side of the wall, close enough to conceal something, far enough to seem ordinary. Too ordinary. Dylan moved to it without hesitation. He grabbed the edge and pulled. The wood scraped loudly against the floor as he dragged at Wulu. Dust rising into the air in a thin cloud. The beam of his flashlight followed the movement and stopped. The seam was clearer now, more defined. A rectangular outline, perfectly aligned with the wall panels. Dylan crouched slowly, his heart pounding harder now, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, carefully hidden. His fingers pressed along the edge again, searching, feeling for any irregularity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft click, barely audible. The panel shifted, just a fraction. Dylan froze, every muscle in his body locked in place. Coda leaned forward slightly, a low rumble building again in his chest. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, like something long buried had just taken its first breath. Dylan stared at the panel. Whatever was behind it, it had been waiting, and Coda had found it. Dylan exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "All right," he whispered. The word hung in the cold air. His hand tightened on the edge of the panel, and then he pulled. The wooden panel gave way with a dry, splintering sound, shifting inward just enough to reveal darkness behind it. A narrow cavity, no larger than a small storage space. Cold air slipped out from within, stale and untouched, carrying the faint scent of oil and old paper. Dylan held his breath. Coda leaned forward, nose working the air, but didn't enter. Not yet. He waited, just like he always did, letting Dylan make the call. The beam of the flashlight cut into the hidden space. Something metallic caught the light. A box, small, rusted, wrapped in what looked like old canvas. Dylan reached in slowly, every movement controlled, his instincts guiding him like they had in places far worse than this. His fingers brushed the surface of the object, cold, solid, real. He pulled it out and set it on the table. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, the sound of a truck passing on a distant road snapped him back. No, not a truck. A memory. The cabin faded. The mountains vanished. And suddenly, heat, dust, gunfire cracking through the air, a voice shouting his name, the smell of burned metal, the weight of someone collapsing beside him. Dylan jerked back, blinking hard, his breath coming fast and shallow. "Easy, easy," he muttered to himself, pressing a hand against the table to steady it. Coda was already there. The dog pressed close, his shoulder against Dylan's leg, grounding him. Solid, present, real. Dylan closed his eyes for a second, forcing the past back where it belonged. When he opened them again, the cabin returned. The box was still there, waiting. He exhaled slowly. "Not tonight," he said quietly. The words surprised even him, but he meant them. Whatever was inside that box had waited this long. It could wait a few more hours. Dylan pushed the panel back into place, covering the hidden cavity once more. The seam disappeared almost instantly, blending into the wall like it had never been disturbed. The dresser went back in front of it. Not perfect, but enough. He turned off the flashlight. The cabin fell back into darkness. Coda stayed alert, watching the wall long after Dylan stepped away. Outside, the wind howled louder, and somewhere far beyond the trees something moved. 48 hours earlier, the air in southern Utah was dry and restless, carrying dust across the cracked pavement of a forgotten roadside stop. A flickering neon sign buzzed weakly above a diner that had seen better decades. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for one truck. Dylan Mercer sat behind the wheel, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. His eyes were fixed on nothing in particular, just the empty stretch of road ahead. He hadn't shaved in days. His jacket was worn, the fabric faded from sun and time. Everything about him looked temporary, except Coda. The German shepherd sat upright in the passenger seat, alert but calm, his gaze tracking every movement outside the truck. A car passing, a door opening, a stranger stepping too close, always watching, always ready. Dylan reached down, picking up a paper cup from the console. The coffee inside had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Routine. Something steady. Something predictable. The diner door creaked open. A woman stepped out, scanning the parking lot until her eyes landed on the truck. She hesitated, then walked straight toward him. Coda noticed her immediately. His posture shifted, subtle, controlled, not aggressive. Just aware. Dylan saw it too. His hand moved instinctively, resting lightly against Coda's neck. "Easy," he murmured. The woman stopped a few feet from the driver's side window and tapped lightly on the glass. Dylan didn't move right away. People didn't approach him unless they needed something, or wanted something. He rolled the window down halfway. "Can I help you?" he asked. Her expression was polite, but there was something else behind it. Determination. "Dylan Mercer?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Who's asking?" "My name is Rebecca Hale. I'm an attorney out of Cheyenne." Coda's ears flicked. Dylan studied her for a moment. "Clean coat. Organized. Not local. What do you want?" he said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I've been trying to find you for 3 days, she said. "This is important." Dylan didn't take it. "I don't sign anything I don't understand." "It's not a contract," she replied calmly. "It's a notification." A pause. Then, "Your grandmother passed away last week." The words landed quietly, but they hit harder than they should have. Dylan leaned back slightly, processing. "I don't have a grandmother," he said flatly. Rebecca didn't react. "Yes, you do," she said. "Margaret Mercer. Lived in Wyoming. Remote property in the Wind River Range." Dylan's gaze shifted away. He hadn't heard that name in years. Not since. He cut the thought off. "She made it clear in her will," Rebecca continued, "that you are her sole heir." That got his attention. Dylan looked back at her. "Her what?" "The property," she said. "A mountain house. Land included." Dylan let out a quiet breath. "A house." He almost laughed. "I think you've got the wrong guy," he said. "I don't do houses." Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "You're listed by name. There's no mistake." She held the envelope out again. This time, Dylan took it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Obligation always did. Coda leaned in slightly, sniffing the edge of it. Dylan noticed. He always noticed. "What's in there?" he asked. "Details," Rebecca said. "Location. Legal transfer. Access instructions." Dylan turned the envelope over in his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the lot. "You don't have to take it," Rebecca added. "But if you don't, it'll sit there. Empty." Empty. Dylan glanced at his truck, at the worn seats, at the life he was barely holding together, then back at the envelope. "What kind of place is it?" he asked. Rebecca hesitated. "Remote," she said. "Very remote." He nodded slowly. That sounded about right. Dylan tore the envelope open. Inside were papers, maps, a key taped to the corner. Coordinates. Wyoming. He stared at them for a long moment, then folded everything carefully and set it on the dashboard. Rebecca watched him. "Are you going to go?" she asked. Dylan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and scratched behind Coda's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, grounding him, anchoring him. Finally. "Yeah," Dylan said quietly. He looked back at the road. "I guess I am." Coda let out a soft breath, settling back into his seat. As if he already knew, Dylan kept both hands on the wheel, but for a long moment, he didn't start the engine. The envelope from Rebecca Hale sat open on the dashboard, its papers spread beneath the dusty windshield like a map to a life he had never planned to return to. Coordinates, a legal address, a brass key taped to the corner of one page, and one name written in careful ink. Margaret Mercer, his grandmother, the woman he barely remembered. Outside the truck, the Utah wind dragged dust across the parking lot in long, pale ribbons. The diner's neon sign buzzed and flickered behind him. Somewhere inside, plates clattered, coffee poured. Strangers laughed at things Dylan would never hear. It all felt distant, separated from him by glass and years. He looked at Coda. The dog's amber eyes were calm, fixed on him with that steady patience Dylan had come to trust more than any human prom. "You think this is a bad idea?" Dylan asked quietly. Coda blinked once. Dylan almost smiled. "Yeah," he murmured. "Me too." Then he turned the key. The old truck coughed, shuddered, and came alive. By sunrise, they were headed north. The highway stretched ahead in a silver line, cutting through open country where the desert met the sky without apology. Dry hills rolled past the windows. Broken fences leaned along the roadside. Windmills turned slowly over fields that looked abandoned by both rain and time. Dylan drove in silence. He had learned long ago that silence could be either shelter or threat. Out here, on the open road, it was both. Coda sat upright in the passenger seat, facing forward like a soldier on watch. Every now and then, the dog's nose twitched at the changing air. Dust gave way to sage. Sage gave way to pine. The farther north they went, the sharper the world became. Dylan felt it too. Not just the cold, the pull. Some places didn't need voices to call you back. They simply waited until you had nowhere else to go. By late afternoon, Utah's red earth had faded behind them, replaced by long gray highways and distant ridgelines. The Wind River Mountains rose slowly in the distance, pale and jagged beneath a ceiling of clouds. Snow clung to their peaks like old scars. Dylan's grip tightened around the steering wheel. He hadn't been in mountains like these since before the military. Before the teams. Before the mission that lived behind his eyes every time he closed them. He could still remember his grandmother's voice, though barely. Soft, firm, calling him Little Wolf because he used to wander too far from the porch when he was a boy. Then his father stopped taking him there. Then the family stopped saying her name. Then the years did what years do. They buried things. Coda shifted suddenly. Dylan glanced over. The dog's ears had gone forward. What is it? Coda stared through the windshield, body still. Ahead, a narrow sign leaned crookedly beside the road. Welcome to Pine Hollow. Pop. 813. The town appeared a mile later, tucked between forested slopes and a frozen creek that ran beside the road. It looked like the kind of place people passed through only if they were lost or born there. A few storefronts lined the main street, a diner, a bait shop, a hardware store, a post office with faded paint, and an American flag snapping hard in the wind. Dylan slowed the truck. Eyes followed him immediately. A man shoveling snow from the sidewalk paused mid-motion. Two women near the post office stopped talking. A teenager sitting on the tailgate of an old pickup looked up, then quickly looked away. Dylan had been watched before. In villages overseas, at checkpoints, in places where a stranger's arrival could mean trouble. This was different. This felt personal. He pulled into a small gas station at the edge of town. The building was old, its windows cloudy with frost, its roof patched in 3 different colors of tin. A bell over the pump hose clanked softly in the wind. As Dylan stepped out, cold air bit into his face. Coda climbed down after him, landing lightly in the snow. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, but his body held a tight stillness that Dylan knew well. Stay close, Dylan said. Coda did. Dylan began pumping gas. Across the lot, 3 men stood near the garage bay, their conversation dying the moment they saw him. One of them was older, maybe 70, with oil-darkened hands and a wool cap pulled low over his forehead. The old mechanic stared at Dylan longer than the others. Then his gaze dropped to the Wyoming papers on the passenger seat, then to Dylan's face. You headed up Mercer Ridge? The old man asked. Dylan turned slightly. That a problem? The mechanic's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. Depends who's asking. Dylan returned the nozzle to the pump. My name's Dylan Mercer. Silence settled fast. Too fast. One of the younger men near the garage looked away. The other muttered something Dylan couldn't catch. The old mechanic wiped his hands slowly on a rag. Margaret's grandson, he said. Dylan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The old man looked toward the mountains. That land should have stayed buried. Coda's ears flicked. Dylan took 1 step closer. What does that mean? The mechanic shook his head, but it wasn't dismissal. It was fear, dressed up as refusal. Means you ought to buy what you need, and keep driving. I'm not passing through. No, the old man said quietly. I suppose you're not. The gas station door opened behind them, and a woman carrying a paper bag stepped out. She saw Dylan, stopped, then quickly lowered her eyes and hurried to her car. Dylan watched her go. What happened up there? He asked. The mechanic's jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to release. Before he could answer, Coda stiffened. Dylan felt it before he turned. The dog's body angled toward the road, head low, ears locked forward. A black SUV sat across the street near the hardware store. Engine running. Windows dark. It hadn't been there when Dylan pulled in. Dylan's face remained calm, but his mind sharpened. Distance, angle, Line of sight, driver unknown. The SUV didn't move. Neither did Coda. The mechanic noticed it too. His voice dropped. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, barely above the wind. But folks who asked questions about Margaret usually stopped asking. Dylan looked back at him. Who made them stop? The old man's eyes shifted to the SUV, then away. "Road gets narrow past the bridge," he said louder now, like he wanted anyone listening to hear only that. "Snow comes early up there. Don't trust the shoulders." Dylan understood. The conversation was over. He paid inside. The cashier, a tired woman in a red sweater, rang him up without meeting his eyes. When Dylan asked if she knew the best road to the Mercer property, her hand froze on the register. She glanced toward the window. The black SUV still waited outside. "North Road," she said softly. "Past the covered bridge, but I'd go before dark." "Why?" She finally looked at him. For one brief second, there was pity in her face. "Because the mountain gets quiet after dark." Dylan took the receipt. "Quiet doesn't bother me." The woman's mouth tightened. "It should." Outside, Coda was still watching the SUV. Dylan loaded supplies into the truck: water, canned food, batteries, a small bag of dog food, and a roll of heavy tape. Practical things. Necessary things. Things a man bought when he didn't know what he was walking into, but intended to walk in anyway. As he opened the driver's door, the black SUV pulled away from the curb. Slowly. No signal. No hurry. It rolled past the gas station, dark windows reflecting the gray sky. Dylan caught only the faint outline of someone behind the wheel. Coda growled. Low. Deep. The SUV continued toward the northern road, then disappeared around a bend. Dylan stood beside the truck for a moment, watching the empty road. The old mechanic had gone back into the garage. The cashier had turned away from the window. The town moved again, but not normally. Carefully, like people pretending they hadn't seen anything. Dylan climbed into the truck. Coda followed, but didn't settle. He remained upright, eyes fixed ahead. "Yeah," Dylan whispered. "I saw it too. I. They left Pine Hollow behind as the first flakes of snow began to fall. The road climbed quickly, trading pavement for cracked asphalt, then gravel, then packed dirt coated in ice. Pines crowded close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. The truck's tires crunched over frozen ruts. Below the road, a river flashed through the trees, black and fast beneath a skin of broken ice. The sky darkened early. Clouds folded over the mountains like a lid. Dylan drove slower now, not because he was afraid, because the road demanded respect. Every curve hid something. Every dip opened into shadow. The old instincts returned not in panic, but in precision. His eyes moved constantly. Mirrors, tree line, road edge, tracks in the snow. Coda suddenly turned his head toward the rear window. Dylan glanced at the mirror. Nothing. Only the road twisting behind them. Then, a flicker of headlights appeared far back through the trees. Dylan said nothing. The lights vanished, returned, vanished again. Following at distance, his breathing stayed even, but his shoulders tightened. "Coda," he said softly. The dog stood as much as the cab allowed, staring backward. Another mile passed. The headlights remained. Dylan reached a fork in the road. The map from Rebecca said to take the left road toward Mercer Ridge. He slowed, then turned right instead, onto a narrower logging road. The truck following him continued for 3 seconds too long, then stopped. Dylan watched in the mirror. The headlights idled at the fork, then reversed, disappeared. Coda kept staring. Dylan turned the truck around carefully and returned to the correct road. His jaw had gone tight. "Not lost," he murmured, watching. The road narrowed again past the covered bridge the old mechanic had mentioned. The bridge was wooden, aged dark by weather, its roof sagging under snow. Boards groaned under the truck as they crossed. Beneath them, the river moved cold and loud, striking stones hidden in the dark. Halfway across, Dylan saw something carved into one of the interior beams. A single word. Mercer. Not old, not fresh, just visible enough. He drove on without stopping, but Coda saw it too. The dog let out a quiet whine. On the other side of the bridge, the trees opened briefly, revealing the mountain ahead. Mercer Ridge rose like a wall, its slopes buried in pine and shadow. Somewhere up there was the house. His grandmother's house. His inheritance. His warning. The last light faded as they climbed. Snow thickened. The truck's headlights carved 2 pale tunnels through the storm. Then, at the edge of the beam, a shape appeared on the road. Dylan braked. Coda barked once. A deer stood motionless in the middle of the track, its body thin, steam rising from its nostrils. For a moment, it stared at them with wide black eyes. Then it bolted into the trees. Dylan let out the breath he'd been holding, but Coda didn't relax. He was looking past where the deer had stood, at the snow. Tracks crossed the road there, not animal tracks. Boot prints. Fresh. Dylan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Someone had stood in the road before they arrived. Watching. Waiting. He didn't get out. Not in the dark. Not with an unknown observer in the trees. He eased the truck forward. Coda stayed rigid, his gaze fixed on the forest edge until the tracks vanished behind them. For the first time since leaving Utah, Dylan felt something stronger than reluctance. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that settled deep in the bones. This road remembered his family. And whatever waited at the top of the mountain had already noticed he was coming. The final turn appeared just before night swallowed the ridge completely. A rusted metal gate stood open beside a weathered wooden sign half covered in snow. Mercer property. Private road. Dylan stopped the truck. The gate swung slowly in the wind. Open. As if someone had been expecting him. Coda's growl filled the cab. Dylan stared through the windshield at the narrow road beyond, disappearing into black pine and falling snow. Then he put the truck in gear. "All right," he whispered. "Let's meet the past." The truck rolled forward through the open gate. Behind them, the wind pushed it slowly closed. And the sound of metal striking metal echoed through the trees like a lock sealing shut. Dylan didn't look back. He kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel as the truck crawled up the narrow private road. Snow thickened around them, swallowing the tire tracks almost as soon as they were made. The trees pressed in tighter here, tall pines bending under the weight of winter, their branches scraping faintly along the sides of the truck. Coda didn't sit. He stood braced against the passenger door, eyes fixed ahead, ears forward, every muscle coiled. The dog's posture had shifted completely now from alert to operational, the same way he used to stand before breaching a door. Dylan noticed. "Yeah," he muttered. "I feel it too." The road curved sharply, climbing higher along the ridge. Below them, darkness swallowed the valley. Above, the sky had turned into a solid sheet of gray, pressing low over the mountain. Then the trees opened. The cabin stood at the center of a small clearing, surrounded by snow and silence. Dylan eased off the gas. For a moment he just stared. It wasn't what he expected. The structure was old, yes, but not abandoned. The logs were dark and weathered, but intact. The roof sagged slightly under the snow, yet held firm. A stone chimney rose along one side, cutting a hard line against the sky. A wooden porch wrapped around the front, its railing worn smooth by time. But it was the stillness that struck him. No broken windows, no collapsed walls, no signs of decay beyond age. It looked preserved, as if someone had left and planned to come back. Dylan killed the engine. The sudden silence rang louder than the wind. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Coda jumped down first. The dog landed without a sound, paws sinking lightly into the snow. He didn't run. He didn't explore. He circled, wide, slow, methodical. Dylan stepped out after him, pulling his jacket tighter as the cold hit his face. His breath fogged instantly, drifting upward before disappearing into the gray air. Coda swept the perimeter of the clearing, nose low, tracing invisible lines through the snow. His tail remained level, not relaxed, not aggressive. Assessing. Dylan watched him work. It had been years since they'd done this outside a mission zone, and yet, nothing about it felt unfamiliar. He moved toward the porch, boots crunching against the frozen ground. The steps creaked as he climbed them, each sound sharp in the quiet. The front door stood before him, closed. A thin line of frost clung to its edges. Dylan reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key Rebecca had given him. It felt heavier now than it had in Utah. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he slid the key into the lock. It turned, easily, too easily. The door opened with a slow, hollow creak. Cold air drifted out to meet him. Old air. Untouched. Dylan stepped inside. The beam of his flashlight swept across the room. A table near the window, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a coat hanging on a wooden hook beside the door. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but nothing was disturbed. Not knocked over, not broken, not scattered. It was as if time had stopped the moment his grandmother left. Coda entered silently behind him. The dog's behavior changed immediately. No longer scanning the outside. Now he was scanning the inside. Room by room, corner by corner. Dylan moved slowly, following the beam of light. The fireplace was cold. Ash settled neatly in the basin. A stack of firewood sat beside it, untouched. A mug rested on the table, its rim stained faintly from long-dried coffee. He stepped deeper into the room. The floor creaked beneath his weight. The sound echoed. Too loud, too hollow. Dylan stopped. The feeling came back. Not fear, something older. The same pressure he used to feel in the desert, moments before something went wrong. The same silence. The same waiting. Coda paused near the hallway. He didn't move forward. He didn't retreat. He simply stood there, staring down the narrow passage as if something might step out at any moment. "What is it?" Dylan asked quietly. Coda didn't respond. He took one slow step forward, then another. Dylan followed. The hallway led to a small bedroom on the right and a kitchen area on the left. Everything was arranged neatly, too neatly. A bed made tight, a folded blanket, a pair of old boots placed carefully near the wall. No signs of struggle, no signs of departure, just absence. Dylan stepped into the bedroom. A dresser stood against the far wall. A mirror hung above it. Dust coated the surface, but not thick enough to hide the faint outline of something that had once been touched recently. He moved closer, ran his fingers across the wood. Clean. Someone had been here. Not long ago. Coda let out a low growl behind him. Dylan turned. The dog was staring back toward the main room. Not the hallway. Not the bedroom. The wall near the fireplace. The same wall. Dylan felt his chest tighten. "You're still on that," he said quietly. Coda didn't move. Dylan stepped back into the main room, his boots echoing across the floorboards. The wall stood exactly as it had before. Plain. Still. Silent. But now he knew better. He crossed the room slowly, his gaze locked on the surface. The seam. It was barely visible, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Dylan reached out again, fingers brushing along the edge. Cold, solid, waiting. Coda stepped beside him, sitting this time. Not restless, not aggressive. Focused. Ready. Dylan exhaled slowly. "This place," he murmured. The words trailed off. He didn't need to finish them. Coda already understood. Dylan turned away from the wall. Not yet. He needed to secure the space first. He moved to the windows, checking each one carefully. All locked, all intact, no signs of forced entry. The back door held firm. The kitchen window was frosted shut. Everything looked untouched. But something felt wrong. Not recently disturbed. Not actively dangerous. Just held, like the cabin itself was keeping something inside. Dylan returned to the main room and set his pack down near the fireplace. He pulled out a small lantern and lit it, letting warm light fill the space slowly, pushing back the shadows inch by inch. Coda remained near the wall, watching, listening. Dylan sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing his hands together slowly. The warmth from the lantern helped, but the tension in his chest didn't ease. He looked around again, at the coat, the mug, the chair. His grandmother had lived here. Alone. For how long? And why had no one come back? Coda shifted slightly. Dylan looked up. The dog's ears had tilted toward the window. A sound. Faint. Outside. Dylan stood instantly, moving to the side of the window, staying out of direct view. He angled the flashlight low, scanning the clearing through the glass. Nothing. Just snow. Trees. Wind. Then, movement. A shadow slipping between the pines at the edge of the clearing. Gone in a second. Dylan didn't move. Didn't breathe. Coda growled low, deep, controlled. "Yeah," Dylan whispered. "We're not alone." The wind picked up again, rattling the cabin lightly. The shadow didn't return, but the feeling remained. Watching. Waiting. Dylan stepped back from the window slowly. His eyes moved to the wall, then back to Coda. The dog didn't look away. Whatever was hidden in that wall, it wasn't the only thing out there. Dylan reached down and picked up the flashlight again. His grip tightened. "All right," he said quietly. His voice had changed. No hesitation now, no doubt. "Let's see what she left us." He stepped toward the wall. And this time, he wasn't stopping. Dylan stepped up to the wall with a steadiness that came from years of doing the hard thing even when every instinct warned against it. His flashlight beam held steady now, no tremor in his grip. The seam was there, faint but undeniable, running vertical between two aged boards just to the right of the fireplace. Coda stood beside him, head low, eyes locked. Waiting. Dylan slid his fingers along the wood again, slower this time, feeling for any give, any imperfection. The cabin seemed to hold its breath with him. Even the wind outside softened, as if the mountain itself leaned in to listen. There, a slight shift beneath his fingertips, a pressure point. Dylan pressed. A quiet click answered him. The panel loosened. He leaned his shoulder into it and pulled. The wood gave way, revealing the narrow cavity once more. Darkness inside, still air, the same faint scent of oil and age. Coda stepped forward immediately, nose pushing into the opening, inhaling deeply. His tail stiffened, then lowered slightly, not alarmed, but certain. Dylan reached in and pulled the box back out. It landed heavier on the table than before, the dull thud echoing across the room. He unwrapped the old canvas carefully, revealing rusted metal beneath edges worn, corners dented, but still intact. The latch resisted at first, then gave. The lid creaked open. Inside, paper, stacks of it, carefully folded, bound with twine that had darkened with time. Photographs lay on top, black and white, their edges curled and fragile. Beneath them, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and something else, thin envelopes, sealed with yellowed adhesive. Dylan didn't touch anything right away. He just looked. His pulse slowed, not from calm, from focus. He picked up the top photograph. It showed the cabin, years ago. The trees were smaller, the porch looked newer, and standing in front of it, a woman, older, but strong in her posture. Margaret Mercer, his grandmother. Beside her stood a man Dylan didn't recognize, tall, clean-cut, wearing a coat too fine for this kind of place. His smile looked right, but something in his eyes didn't match it. Dylan turned the photo over. A name was written in ink. Wade Brannon. Dylan's jaw tightened slightly. He set the photo down and reached for one of the newspaper clippings. The headline was bold. The ink faded but still readable. Local woman accused in relief fund misuse. Below it, Margaret Mercer. Dylan read further. Accusations, missing funds, questions about land ownership, a suggestion that she had taken advantage of a disaster to gain property. His eyes moved faster now. Another clipping. Mercer under investigation. Another. Community demands answers. The narrative was clear. Too clear. Dylan leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. This doesn't fit, he muttered. Coda let out a soft whine. Dylan glanced at him. You see it too, don't you? The dog's ears flicked. Dylan picked up a second photograph. This one showed a group of people standing near what looked like a construction site. Mud, debris, broken structures behind them. Flood damage, maybe. Disaster aftermath. Margaret stood at the edge of the frame, not smiling, watching. Near the center stood the same man, Wade Brannon. This time, he was shaking hands with someone Dylan couldn't see clearly. But the posture, the angle, the body language, ownership, control. Dylan flipped the photo over. Nothing written. He set it down carefully. Relief funds, he murmured. Land deals. He reached for the handwritten notes next. The paper was thicker, older, the ink slightly smeared in places. Margaret's handwriting, strong, precise. The first line read, "They're not telling the truth." Dylan's chest tightened slightly. He read on. The funds were never meant to rebuild. They were meant to relocate. But relocation turned into acquisition. People signed what they didn't understand. They trusted the wrong men. Dylan swallowed. Another page. Brannon controls the board now. No one questions him. Not openly. Another. If something happens to me, the records must stay hidden. Dylan froze. Coda stepped closer, pressing against his leg. The room felt smaller now. The walls closer. The air heavier. Dylan flipped through more pages. Dates. Names. Amounts. References to land parcels. Signatures. This wasn't just suspicion. This was documentation. Careful. Detailed. Deliberate. Dylan leaned back in the chair slowly. His grandmother hadn't been hiding money. She had been tracking it. Coda let out a low growl. Dylan looked up. The dog was staring at the front door. Ears forward. Body tense. Dylan's hand moved instinctively to the flashlight again. "Did you hear something?" he asked quietly. Coda didn't respond, but he didn't relax either. Dylan stood, moving silently across the room. He stopped, just short of the door, angling his body to the side, the same way he had learned to approach unknown entry points overseas. He listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just wind. But something felt off. He opened the door slowly. The hinges creaked softly. Cold air rushed in. The clearing stretched out before him, blanketed in fresh snow. The trees stood still, their branches heavy and unmoving. At first glance, nothing. Then Dylan saw it. Tracks. Near the edge of the porch. Boot prints. Fresh. They hadn't been there before. Coda stepped beside him, nose low, following the line of prints outward. They led away from the cabin, toward the trees. Dylan crouched, examining them. Deep impressions. Heavy weight. Not old. Hours at most. He stood slowly. They were here, he said. Coda growled. Dylan's eyes moved across the clearing. Tree line. Shadows. Movement. No, nothing moved. But the feeling returned. That same presence from earlier. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. Dylan stepped back inside and closed the door firmly. The latch clicked into place. He turned the lock, then crossed the room and checked the back entrance. Secure. Windows. All intact. But the sense of safety didn't return. It never really had. Dylan went back to the table. The box sat open, its contents exposed. Evidence. Proof. Danger. He looked down at the papers again, at his grandmother's words, at the name written over and over. Wade Brannon. This isn't over, Dylan said quietly. Coda sat beside him. Silent. Steady. Dylan gathered the documents carefully, placing them back inside the box one by one. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. But his mind had already shifted. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a warning. And someone out there already knew he had found it. Dylan closed the lid of the box slowly. The metal clicked shut. The sound echoed softly through the cabin. Outside, the wind rose again. Stronger now, as if the mountain itself had something to say. And this time, Dylan was listening. Not just to the wind or the creak of old wood settling into the cold. He was listening the way he had been trained to listen. Beyond sound, beyond the obvious. The kind of listening that measured absence as much as presence. Coda stood near the door, unmoving, ears forward, eyes fixed on a point Dylan couldn't see. The dog's posture had gone completely rigid now. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. Dylan moved slowly across the room, his boots barely making a sound against the floorboards. He set the lockbox down beneath the table, pushing it just far enough into shadow to disappear from casual view. Not hidden but not obvious. Not yet. He reached for his pack and pulled out a small flashlight, a knife, and a length of cord. Habit, preparation, control. Outside, the wind dropped suddenly. The silence that followed felt unnatural. Dylan's breath slowed. His heartbeat didn't. Coda's head tilted slightly. Then, a faint sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. A shift of weight outside the cabin. Snow compressing. Dylan froze. Every muscle locked into place. The sound came again, closer this time. A step, then another. Coda's growl rose low and steady, vibrating through the room like distant thunder. Dylan moved to the side of the window, staying out of direct line, angling the flashlight down. His eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness outside. The clearing looked empty. Snow fell lightly now, drifting in slow, silent patterns. But the tracks, they had changed. The prints he had seen earlier near the porch. There were more now. Fresh, closer, leading toward the cabin, and stopping just below the window. Dylan's jaw tightened. They had come right up to the house, close enough to look in, close enough to listen. Coda shifted suddenly, turning his attention toward the back of the cabin. Dylan followed instantly. Another sound, this time, from the rear. A soft scrape, metal against wood. The back window. Dylan moved fast, not running, not rushing. Controlled speed. He reached the kitchen just as the sound came again. A faint pressure against the frame. Someone testing it. Coda lunged forward with a sharp bark, slamming his weight against the door between them and the window. The sudden noise exploded through the silence. The pressure stopped instantly. Dylan swung the flashlight toward the glass. Nothing. Just darkness. But something moved in that darkness. A shadow slipping away from the edge of the light. Gone. Dylan stepped closer, pressing himself against the wall beside the window, listening. Footsteps. Fast now. Retreating. Snow crunching under weight. Then. Nothing. Silence again. Coda didn't stop growling. Dylan waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. No return. No second attempt. He exhaled slowly, but his body didn't relax. They're checking the house, he said quietly. Coda looked up at him. They knew exactly where to come. The dog's ears flicked. Dylan stepped back into the main room, scanning everything again. The table, The floor, the wall, the hidden panel behind the dresser. Nothing had been taken. Nothing moved. They hadn't come for the box. They had come to confirm something. Or someone. Dylan walked to the front door and opened it quickly, stepping out onto the porch. Cold air hit him hard. Snow drifted across the clearing. The tracks were clearer now. 2 sets, both leading away from the cabin, toward the trees. One heavier, one lighter. One lighter. Working together. Dylan followed them a few steps into the snow, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Show yourselves," he said under his breath. No answer. Of course not. People like that didn't show themselves. They watched. They waited. They tested. Coda stepped beside him, nose low, tracking the scent trail for several yards. Then, he stopped, dead still, refusing to go further. Dylan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Coda's body stiffened, his head angled slightly toward the deeper forest. His growl returned, lower this time. Different. Not warning. Recognition. Dylan's chest tightened. The same feeling crept back in. That pressure behind his ribs. That edge of memory. The desert. The heat. The smell of oil and dust. A teammate shouting. Gunfire cracking through the air. Dylan shut his eyes for half a second, forcing the memory down. "Not now," he whispered. Coda pressed against his leg. Solid. Present. Dylan opened his eyes again. The forest stood silent. Dark. Watching. He looked down at the tracks again. "They didn't want to be seen," he said. Coda didn't move. "But they wanted us to know they were here." Dylan turned back toward the cabin slowly. His mind was already working. They had approached from the forest, tested the window, observed the interior, and left. No break-in. No attempt to force entry. That wasn't theft. That was surveillance. And surveillance meant information. They were gathering it. About him. About what he knew. About what he had found. Dylan stepped back onto the porch. Before entering, he paused. Something caught his eye. Near the edge of the door frame, at knee height, a mark. Small, fresh, carved into the wood. He leaned closer. The shape was simple. 2 lines. Intersecting. Like a rough X. Not random. Deliberate. A signal. Coda saw it too. The dog let out a low, sharp growl. Dylan straightened slowly. "They marked it," he said. The realization settled heavily. The cabin. The property. Him. Marked. He stepped inside and shut the door firmly, sliding the bolt into place. The sound felt louder this time. Final. Dylan crossed the room and grabbed the lockbox from beneath the table. His movements were faster now. More precise. He carried it to the far side of the cabin and lifted a loose floorboard near the couch. A second hiding place. Not the original one, but better. For now. He lowered the box inside and replaced the board carefully, pressing it down until it blended with the rest of the floor. Coda watched him the entire time. When Dylan finished, the dog moved back toward the center of the room and sat, facing the door, guarding. Dylan leaned back against the wall, running a hand through his hair slowly. His breathing steadied, but the tension didn't leave. "They're not going to stop," he said quietly. Coda didn't respond. He didn't need to. Dylan pushed himself off the wall and walked to the window again, keeping his body angled away from the glass. The clearing was empty, the tracks already fading under new snow. But the presence, that didn't fade. It stayed. Lingering. Waiting. Dylan's eyes moved back to the wall near the fireplace. To the hidden panel. To the truth his grandmother had left behind. "This isn't about the past," he said softly. His voice had changed again. Colder now. Sharper. "This is still happening." Coda's ears flicked. Dylan looked down at him. "Which means they're still protecting it." The wind rose outside, rattling the cabin once more. Dylan didn't flinch. He walked back to the center of the room, stopping beside the place where the box was hidden. His posture straightened, his shoulders settled, not retreating, not hesitating, deciding. "We don't leave," he said. Coda stood. One step forward, ready. Dylan nodded once. "Good," he murmured. Because deep down, he knew the truth now. This wasn't just his grandmother's secret anymore, and whoever had come to the cabin tonight had just made it his fight. The words settled into Dylan's chest with a weight he recognized. Not anger, not fear. Purpose. The kind that didn't ask permission. Coda stepped closer, pressing against his leg for just a second before moving away again, resuming his position near the center of the room, watching, listening. The cabin had changed. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a perimeter. Dylan moved with quiet efficiency. He checked the doors again, the windows, the corners of the room. Not because he expected something new, but because routine brought control. Control kept the past where it belonged. The lantern flickered softly, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind eased, leaving behind a silence that felt even heavier than before. Too quiet. Dylan returned to the floorboard and lifted it again, retrieving the lockbox. This time, he carried it to the table without hesitation. "If they're watching," he muttered, "we don't get the luxury of waiting." Coda stood beside him. "Ready." Dylan opened the box again, pushing aside the photographs and clippings until he reached the bottom layer. There, a smaller bundle, wrapped tighter, protected. He untied the twine slowly, revealing a set of folded papers beneath. But before he could unfold them, Coda reacted. Not a growl, not a bark, something sharper. His entire body snapped forward, muscles locking, ears pinned toward the far corner of the room. The corner near the hallway. Dylan froze. "Coda?" The dog didn't respond. He moved, fast, crossing the room in 3 silent steps before stopping near the wall just beyond the bedroom doorway. His nose pressed low against the floor, then lifted, drawing in the air. Then, he let out a sharp, aggressive bark. Not warning. Engagement. Dylan's heart slammed once in his chest. "What is it?" he demanded, already moving. Coda scratched once at the floor, then twice, then stopped, his head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing, focus locked on something invisible. Dylan crouched beside him, sweeping the flashlight beam across the area. Nothing. Just wood. Dust. Silence. But Coda wasn't wrong. He was never wrong. Dylan leaned closer, lowering his hand to the floor. The boards were solid, but there, a scent. Faint. Almost gone. But real. His breath caught. Oil. Not the kind used in kitchens or tools. Cleaner. Sharper. Military grade. The memory hit him like a punch. Heat. Sand. A rifle chamber clicking into place. The smell of that exact oil rising from a weapon in his hands. Dylan jerked back slightly, his vision tightening for a split second as the cabin dissolved into something else. Gunfire. A body falling beside him, a voice shouting over the chaos. "Mercer! Move!" His pulse surged. Too fast. Too loud. The past pushed in hard, trying to take over. Coda stepped in immediately. The dog pressed against Dylan's chest, breaking the line of sight, grounding him with physical force. Not gentle. Intentional. Dylan blinked hard, dragging himself back into the present. The cabin snapped into place around him. Cold. Still. Real. "I'm good," he said under his breath. Coda didn't move. Not until Dylan's breathing slowed. Not until the tension eased. Then, the dog stepped back and returned his focus to the spot on the floor. Dylan followed his gaze. "This scent," Dylan whispered. "That's not local." Coda let out a low growl. Dylan's jaw tightened. "That's not from someone who lives out here." He scanned the room again, slower this time, more deliberate. Every angle, every shadow, every inch of space. And then, it clicked. They didn't just come tonight. Coda's ears flicked. Dylan nodded once, the realization settling in. They've been here before. The scent wasn't fresh. It wasn't from the footprints outside. It was older, embedded, left behind. Dylan stood slowly, turning back toward the table. They knew about the house. He looked down at the open lockbox. They knew where to look. Coda stepped beside him again, his posture shifting slightly, not just alert now, but engaged. Dylan picked up one of the papers from the bundle he had just opened. This time, he unfolded it. A map, old, hand-drawn, the property outlined in ink, the cabin marked at the center. But there was more. A second marking, behind the structure, near the tree line, a symbol, simple, circular, with a line through it. Dylan frowned. That wasn't in the clippings. He turned the page over. More handwriting. Margaret's. "If anything happens, it cannot stay in the house." Dylan's chest tightened. "What didn't stay?" he murmured. Coda moved again, back toward the hallway, but not the same spot as before. Further, toward the back exit. Dylan followed. The dog stopped at the rear wall, nose low, tracing something along the baseboard. Then, he barked. Once. Sharp. Precise. Dylan crouched again, examining the wood carefully. There were marks. Faint. Scratches. older than the others. Not made by Coda, made by something else. Or someone else. Dylan ran his fingers along the edge. The wood felt different here. Not hollow, like the panel in the main room, but not solid either. Reinforced, covered, deliberately concealed. He leaned back slightly, his mind racing. A second hiding place, he said. Coda didn't react, but he didn't move either. Dylan looked back toward the door, then the windows, then the forest beyond. Whoever had come tonight, they hadn't found this. Not yet, but they were close. Too close. Dylan stood slowly. "We're running out of time," he said. The words came out colder now, clearer, more focused. Coda stepped back beside him. "Ready." Dylan folded the map carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Then he closed the lockbox and secured it again beneath the floorboard. Temporary. Everything was temporary now. He moved back to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the space one last time. The cabin didn't feel the same anymore. Not just watched. Compromised. Dylan exhaled slowly. "They followed us here," he said. Coda's ears flicked, and they brought something with them. The scent still lingered faintly in the air. That oil. That memory. That connection. Dylan's gaze hardened. "This isn't just about my grandmother," he said. His voice was steady. "Certain. This ties back to something else." Coda stepped closer, pressing lightly against his leg. Dylan looked down at him. "You felt it too," he said. The dog didn't answer. But he didn't need to. Dylan nodded once, then turned toward the door. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We go deeper." Outside, the wind returned, brushing through the trees in long, low waves. Inside, the cabin held its silence. But something had shifted. The past wasn't buried anymore. It was moving. And now, it knew exactly where Dylan Mercer was standing. Morning didn't arrive so much as it revealed itself. A slow gray light pushing through the cabin windows like something cautious. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside buried under fresh snow. The mountains stood silent again, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Dylan hadn't slept. Not really. He had sat through the night with his back to the wall, eyes half open, listening to the cabin breathe. Every shift of wood, every whisper of wind, every faint sound outside had been catalogued, measured, dismissed, or remembered. Coda never lay down. The dog remained near the door, changing position only to adjust his angle of view, ears forward, eyes open, guarding. By the time the first light reached the floorboards, Dylan was already on his feet. "Time to move," he said quietly. Coda rose instantly. No hesitation. Dylan grabbed his jacket, the folded map tucked securely inside. He checked the room one last time, his gaze lingering on the wall, the hidden panel, the space beneath the floorboards. Then he turned away. The door opened with a soft creak. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Outside, the clearing looked untouched. Perfect. Except it wasn't. Dylan stepped down from the porch, his boots sinking into the fresh layer of snow. He paused just long enough to scan the tree line, his eyes narrowing slightly as he measured distances, angles, shadows. Nothing moved. But the tracks from the night before were gone, covered, erased. Deliberately or naturally, he couldn't tell. Coda stepped ahead, nose low, already working. "Show me," Dylan said. The dog didn't look back. He moved around the cabin, circling once, then twice, retracing the perimeter with precise, practiced movements. When he reached the rear of the structure, his pace slowed, then stopped. Dylan joined him. The woodshed leaned just beyond the back wall, its roof sagging slightly under the snow. It looked forgotten, neglected, unimportant. Coda didn't think so. The dog stood at the edge of the shed, staring at the ground. Then he began to dig, not frantic, not random, focused. Dylan crouched beside him, brushing away snow with his gloved hands. Beneath the surface, the ground felt different. Hard. Unnatural. His fingers struck metal. Dylan froze. "What is this?" he murmured. Coda barked once. Sharp. Certain. Dylan cleared more snow, revealing the outline of a circular steel hatch embedded in the ground. Rusted, but intact. Heavy. Designed to last. His pulse slowed. Not from calm. From realization. "This is it," he said. Coda stepped back slightly, giving him space. Dylan gripped the edge of the hatch and pulled. At first, it didn't move. Then, with a deep groan, the metal lifted. Cold air rushed out from below, thick with the smell of earth, paper, and time. A ladder descended into darkness. Dylan clicked on his flashlight and aimed it downward. Wooden rungs. A small chamber. Hidden. Protected. Forgotten. Or meant to be. He looked at Coda. Stay close. The dog didn't hesitate. Dylan climbed down slowly, testing each step before shifting his weight. The ladder creaked, but held. The air grew colder as he descended, heavier, untouched for decades. When his boots hit the ground, he swept the flashlight across the room. Shelves, metal, old but carefully organized. Boxes stacked with precision, folders labeled in fading ink. And along the far wall, a corkboard covered in photographs. Dylan stepped forward. His breath caught. The photos showed the town. Pine Hollow, years ago. Flood damage, collapsed homes, families standing in mud and ruin. And in the center of several images, Wade Brannon, younger, confident, shaking hands, pointing, directing. Dylan turned to the shelves. He opened the nearest box. Inside were ledgers, detailed, precise, names, dates, amounts, land transfers, property acquisitions. Every entry told the same story. People lost everything, and someone took advantage. Dylan flipped through the pages quickly now, his eyes scanning for patterns. They were there, clear, repeated, systematic. This wasn't an accident, he said under his breath. Coda let out a low growl behind him. Dylan nodded. They planned it. He moved to another box. Inside, audio tapes, dozens of them, carefully labeled. He picked one up, Margaret Mercer's handwriting. Meeting with Brannon. Refused offer. Dylan's grip tightened. He looked around the room again. Everything here. Every document. Every recording. Every photograph. It wasn't random. It was a case. His grandmother hadn't been hiding. She had been building something. A record. A truth. A weapon. Dylan stepped back slowly, the weight of it settling into him. She knew, he said quietly. Coda stood beside him, still, steady. She knew what they were doing. Dylan turned to the corkboard again. One photo caught his attention. It showed Brannon standing beside a group of men near a newly built structure. Behind them, a ridge, a slope, something familiar. Dylan stepped closer. His eyes narrowed. That ridge, that was this mountain, this land, this property. They didn't just take land, he said. They built on it. Coda's ears flicked. Dylan turned back to the ledgers. He flipped to the final pages. The handwriting had changed. Less steady, more urgent. If anything happens to me, the evidence must stay hidden. They cannot erase this. Dylan swallowed. His grandmother had known. She had seen it coming. And she had chosen to stay. To hide the truth instead of running. Alone. Coda nudged his hand. Dylan exhaled slowly. She didn't lose, he said. His voice was quieter now, more certain. She protected it. Coda stepped closer. Dylan looked down at him. And now we have it. The dog held his gaze. No fear. No hesitation. Just readiness. Dylan nodded once, then turned back toward the ladder. We're not done, he said. As he climbed back up into the light, the world felt different, clearer, sharper. The mountain wasn't just watching anymore. It was holding something. And now, Dylan Mercer knew exactly what it was. Not just evidence. Not just history. Power. The kind that didn't fade with time. The kind that buried itself deep and waited, protected by silence and fear. Dylan stood at the edge of the clearing, the cold air biting through his jacket as he stared out over the snow-covered trees. The hatch behind him was sealed again, hidden carefully beneath fresh snow and scattered debris. If someone hadn't known it was there, they wouldn't find it. But someone had come close. Too close. Coda stood beside him, body angled toward the tree line, scanning the shadows. The dog's posture hadn't softened since they came back up from the bunker. If anything, it had sharpened. Dylan exhaled slowly. They're going to come back, he said. Coda didn't move. Didn't need to. Dylan turned toward the cabin, his mind already working through the next steps. The documents were real. The recordings were real. And if even half of what he'd seen was true, Wade Brannon wasn't just a name in old clippings. He was still part of something active, something protected. Dylan stepped onto the porch and pushed the door open. The cabin felt different now. No longer just watched, occupied. Not by people, but by truth. He crossed to the table and pulled the lockbox out once more, this time removing a handful of the most critical documents, maps, ledger copies, a single tape, enough to prove something if he needed to. The rest stayed hidden, for now. Coda's head snapped toward the road. Dylan froze. A sound. Low. Distant. An engine. He stepped back toward the door slowly, moving to the side, before opening it just enough to see out. Through the trees. Movement. A dark shape approaching along the narrow road. Not fast. Deliberate. Dylan stepped outside. Coda followed immediately, positioning himself just slightly ahead, his body forming a silent barrier. The vehicle emerged into the clearing. A black SUV, the same one from Pine Hollow. It rolled to a stop just short of the porch. The engine idled. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the driver's door opened. An older man stepped out. Tall, composed, wearing a heavy wool coat and leather gloves. His hair was silver, neatly combed back, his posture straight, controlled. The kind of man who didn't rush because he never needed to. Power didn't hurry. The passenger door opened next. A younger man followed. Similar build, sharper edges, less patience in his eyes. They approached together. Coda's growl rose instantly, low and steady, vibrating through the cold air. Dylan didn't move, didn't step back. He stood at the top of the porch, meeting them where he was. The older man stopped a few feet away. Close enough, not too close. "Mr. Mercer," he said, calmly. His voice was smooth, practiced. "My name is Wade Brannon." Dylan didn't offer his hand. "Yeah," he said. "I figured." Brannon's eyes flicked briefly toward Coda. "Impressive dog," he said. "He's not for show," Dylan replied. The younger man smirked slightly, but there was tension in it. "Looks like he knows his job," he said. "He does," Dylan answered. Silence stretched between them, cold, measured. Brannon took one step forward. "Word travels fast in small places," he said. "We heard Margaret's grandson had come back." Dylan crossed his arms slowly. "And you figured you'd stop by?" "A courtesy," Brannon replied. Coda's growl deepened. The younger man shifted slightly, his hand moving near his coat instinctively. Coda reacted instantly, one step forward, posture hardening. "Ready." "Don't," Dylan said quietly. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The younger man stopped. Brannon raised a hand slightly. "Relax," he said. "We're not here for trouble." Dylan held his gaze. "Then why are you here?" Brannon's smile was small, controlled. "This land," he said, glancing briefly toward the cabin, "has a complicated history." Dylan didn't answer. Brannon continued. "Your grandmother?" "She had a different perspective on things." "That what you call it?" Dylan said. Brannon's expression didn't change. "She believed she was protecting people," he said. "In reality, she caused a lot of unnecessary damage." I. Coda barked once. Sharp. Angry. Dylan's jaw tightened. "She documented what you did," he said. Brannon's eyes flicked back to him. For the first time, something shifted. Not fear, but recognition. "You've been busy," Brannon said quietly. Dylan didn't deny it. The younger man stepped forward slightly. "You should understand something," he said. "That material, whatever you think you found it, doesn't mean what you think it means." Dylan looked at him. "It means enough." Brannon exhaled slowly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you've been away a long time. You don't know how things work here." Dylan's voice dropped. "I know enough." Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. Brannon nodded slightly. "As a gesture of good faith," he said, "we're prepared to make you an offer." Dylan didn't move. "Sell the property," Brannon continued. "Walk away. Clean. No complications." The younger man added quietly. "More than fair value." Dylan let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Not interested." The answer came fast. "Certain." Brannon studied him. "You should think carefully," he said. "I already did." Coda stepped forward again, placing himself slightly in front of Dylan. Protective. Unyielding. The younger man's patience snapped just slightly. "This place isn't safe," he said. "The roads. The weather. Things happen out here." Dylan's eyes hardened. "Is that a warning?" The younger man didn't answer directly. Brannon placed a hand lightly on his son's shoulder. "That's enough," he said. Then he looked back at Dylan. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Dylan didn't blink. "No," he said. "You are." The wind picked up, swirling snow across the clearing between them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Brannon nodded once. A decision made. "Very well," he said. "We've said what we came to say." He turned toward the SUV. The younger man lingered a second longer, his eyes locked on Dylan, then on Coda. Then he turned and followed. The doors closed. The engine revved. The SUV backed slowly, then turned, disappearing down the narrow road the way it had come. Coda didn't stop watching until the sound was completely gone. Then, silence returned. Dylan stood still for a long moment, his breath steady, his posture unchanged. "They know," he said quietly. Coda stepped back beside him. "They know what's here." The dog's ears flicked. Dylan looked toward the trees, then back at the cabin, then down at the ground beneath his feet. The bunker, the evidence, the truth. He nodded once. "They're not going to let it go." Coda let out a low breath. Dylan turned and walked back inside. The door closed behind him with a firm, final sound. The cabin didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like the center of something, a line that had been crossed. Dylan moved to the table and set the documents down carefully. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, not reactive, strategic. "They made their move," he said. Coda lay down near the door, but didn't relax. Dylan looked at him. "Now we make ours." Outside, the wind carried through the mountains again. But this time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like something waking up. Morning in Pine Hollow carried a different kind of weight now. The snow along Main Street had been cleared into uneven banks, leaving narrow paths between the buildings. Pickup trucks lined the curb. People moved slower than usual, bundled in coats, their voices quieter, their eyes sharper. Dylan parked at the far end of the street. Coda sat beside him, alert, watching everything. "You ready?" Dylan asked. Coda's ears flicked forward. That was enough. The community hall stood at the center of town, a low brick building with a banner stretched across the front. Remembrance Day, in honor of those lost. The doors were already open. People filed in slowly, families, older residents, a few younger faces that didn't fully understand what the day meant. The air carried the scent of coffee, damp wool, and something heavier memory. Dylan stepped out of the truck. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Recognition moved through the crowd like a ripple. The Mercer name hadn't been spoken openly in years, but it hadn't been forgotten. Coda stayed close at his side as they walked toward the entrance. Some people stepped aside. Some didn't. But no one stopped him. Inside, the hall was filled with folding chairs arranged in rows. At the front stood a simple podium, flanked by photographs, old images of the town after the disaster. Flooded streets, broken homes, people standing in silence, staring at what they had lost. Dylan paused near the back. Coda sat beside him, watching, waiting. The room filled quickly. Then, a shift. The murmurs quieted. Wade Brannon entered. He walked with the same calm authority Dylan had seen at the cabin, his son Lucas just behind him. People nodded as he passed, some respectfully, some reluctantly. He took his place at the front, the man who had shaped the town, the man who had controlled its story. Brannon stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice carried easily, steady, confident. "Today we remember a difficult chapter in our town's history, a time of loss, of rebuilding, of strength." Dylan watched him, measured him. The words were practiced, refined over years. A story repeated enough times to become truth, at least to those who never questioned it. "We came together," Brannon continued, "and we moved forward. That's what defines Pine Hollow." Coda's ears twitched. Dylan's hand rested lightly on the dog's back. "Today," Brannon said, "we honor those who were lost and those who helped us rebuild." Dylan stepped forward, one step, then another. The sound of his boots against the floor cut through the room. Heads turned again. This time, fully. Dylan didn't stop until he reached the front row. Brannon's voice faltered for just a second, then recovered. "I'd like to add something," Dylan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The room went still. Brannon looked at him, not surprised, but not pleased. "This is a scheduled," Lucas started. "The truth doesn't need a schedule," Dylan said calmly. Coda stood. The movement alone drew attention. Not aggressive, but undeniable. Brannon's expression shifted, just slightly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "this isn't the place. It's exactly the place." Dylan stepped closer to the podium. The tension in the room tightened. Some people leaned forward, others shifted uncomfortably. Everyone was listening. Dylan reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded documents. Then the tape. He placed them on the podium, carefully, deliberately. "This town remembers the disaster," he said. "But it doesn't remember what happened after." Murmurs spread. Brannon's jaw tightened. "These are records," Dylan continued. "Land transfers, relief funds, agreements made when people had nothing left." Lucas stepped forward again. "That's enough. Let him speak," someone called from the back. Another voice followed. "Yeah, let him talk." The shift was subtle, but real. Dylan opened one of the ledgers. "Families lost their homes," he said. "And then they lost their land. Signed over, under pressure, for a fraction of what it was worth." He held up a page. Names, addresses, signatures. The room leaned in. "Those properties didn't disappear," Dylan said. "They were acquired." He turned slightly, looked directly at Brannon, by the same people who were supposed to help. Silence hit hard, heavy, unavoidable. Brannon's face remained composed, but the calm had cracks now. "These accusations," he began. Dylan pressed play. The tape hissed softly. Then, a voice, younger, but unmistakable. "Wade Brannon, you walk away, Margaret. That's the only option. Nobody needs to know how this works." The room froze. "You keep your head down," the voice continued, "and everyone moves on." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a cup. It shattered against the floor. Coda's growl rumbled low. Dylan let the tape run. The words filled the room. Clear. Undeniable. Brannon's grip tightened on the podium. "That's taken out of context," he said. But the authority in his voice was gone. Dylan didn't raise his own. He didn't need to. "She documented everything," he said. "Not to destroy the town, but to protect it." He placed the final paper on the podium. His grandmother's handwriting. "If anything happens, the truth must survive." Dylan looked out at the crowd. "These people trusted you," he said, "and you took everything they had left." The room erupted, not in chaos. In realization. Voices rose. Questions. Anger. Confusion breaking into clarity. Lucas stepped toward his father. "We need to go," he muttered. Brannon didn't move. For a moment, he just stood there, the man who had owned the narrative, watching it collapse. Then he stepped back, not defeated, but exposed. And that was enough. Dylan stepped away from the podium. Coda stayed at his side. The crowd parted without being asked. As they walked toward the door, no one stopped them. No one spoke. But everything had changed. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. The snow reflected the gray sky above, stretching out over the mountains like a blank page. Dylan paused at the steps. Coda sat beside him. The town behind them buzzed with voices now louder, uncertain, alive. The truth had done what it was meant to do. It had broken the silence. Dylan looked out toward the ridge. The cabin, the land, his grandmother's fight. "It's out now," he said quietly. Coda leaned against him. Solid. Steady. Dylan nodded once. But he knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The noise inside the community hall followed Dylan out into the cold, voices rising, questions colliding, the past finally breaking through decades of silence. But out here, the mountain didn't echo with it. The wind carried the sound away, leaving only a low murmur behind. Dylan stood at the base of the steps, his breath steady, his posture still. Coda leaned lightly against his leg, grounding him, holding him in place. For the first time since arriving in Pine Hollow, Dylan didn't feel like he was being watched. He felt empty. Not hollow, just spent. He looked down at his hands. They were still steady, but the tension that had carried him through the confrontation was gone, leaving something quieter in its place. Coda nudged him. Dylan glanced down. The dog's eyes were calm now. No threat, no urgency, just presence. "Yeah," Dylan murmured. "We're not done yet." They walked back to the truck in silence. The town behind them was no longer quiet. Doors opened. People gathered in small clusters, voices rising as the truth spread faster than it could be contained. Faces that had once avoided his now looked directly at him, some with gratitude, some with disbelief, some with something deeper. Regret. Dylan didn't stop, didn't engage. Not yet. The road back to the cabin was slower. Not because of the weather, because of the weight. The mountains felt different now. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Just honest. Coda rested his head near the window, watching the tree line pass by. His posture had softened, but not completely. A soldier doesn't forget the mission, just because the first objective is complete. Neither did Dylan. By the time they reached the gate, the light had already begun to fade. The sky stretched out in muted shades of gray and pale blue, the last of the day slipping quietly behind the ridge. Dylan parked near the cabin and shut off the engine. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, he stepped out. The clearing was still, untouched. No tracks, no signs of anyone returning. The mountain had settled again. Coda walked beside him as they approached the porch. No tension, no growl, just awareness. Inside, the cabin felt warmer. Not physically. Something else. Dylan closed the door behind them and moved directly to the table. The documents he had taken were gone, left behind at the hall. But the rest, still here, still protected. He crossed to the floorboard and lifted it, retrieving the lockbox one last time. This time he didn't rush. He carried it to the table and sat down slowly. Coda lay beside him, his head resting across his paws, watching without pressure. Dylan opened the box. The papers inside looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. He reached for a smaller bundle near the bottom. One he hadn't opened before. The paper was thinner, more fragile, personal. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was familiar, but different, less precise, more human. A letter, not addressed, not sealed, just written. Dylan began to read. If you are reading this, it means I was right to keep it hidden. His chest tightened slightly. He continued. I know what they will say about me. I know what they already believe. But the truth does not survive by being loud. It survives by being protected. Dylan swallowed. The cabin grew quieter. I did not leave because I was afraid. I left because I understood what they would do to anyone who stood beside me. His hand tightened on the paper. Your father tried to stand with me. The words hit harder than anything before. Dylan's breath slowed. He kept reading. They warned him. Not with words, with actions. I saw it before he did. I saw how far they were willing to go. A memory flickered at the edge of Dylan's mind. His father, quiet, distant, always watching something that wasn't there. I made a choice, one I knew he would never understand. I let them believe I was guilty. I let the town turn against me, because if they believed I had already lost everything, they would stop looking for more. Dylan closed his eyes for a second. The weight of it pressed down on him. She hadn't run. She had stepped aside, deliberately, so the damage would stop with her. I protected what mattered. Not my name, not my place here, but my family. The word lingered. Family. Dylan's jaw tightened. Coda shifted slightly beside him, sensing the change. Dylan reached down, resting a hand on the dog's neck. Solid, present. I do not know if you will ever come back, but if you do, I hope you understand that silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the only way to keep something alive long enough for the truth to find its moment. Dylan let out a slow breath. The letter trembled slightly in his hand. That moment had come. Not because she had forced it, but because she had waited. He finished the final line. If you are standing here now, then I was not alone. Dylan lowered the paper slowly. The cabin felt different again. Not heavy, not tense. Still, respectful. He looked at the wall, the hidden panel, the place where it had all started, then at the floor, the bunker beneath, the evidence she had protected. For years, alone. Coda lifted his head, watching him. Dylan nodded once. She didn't lose, he said quietly. His voice was steady, clear. She held it together. Coda stood and stepped closer, pressing lightly against him. Dylan placed the letter back into the box carefully, folding it the way he had found it, not hiding it, honoring it. He closed the lid slowly. The metal clicked into place. This time, the sound didn't echo. It settled. Dylan leaned back in the chair, his eyes moving slowly across the room. The coat on the hook, the chair by the fire, the life she had lived here. Not as an exile, but as a guardian. He exhaled slowly. The anger that had driven him earlier had changed. Not gone, but transformed. Into something quieter, something deeper. Purpose. Coda lay down beside him again. This time, relaxed. Dylan rested his hand on the table, fingers brushing lightly against the surface. We finished it, he murmured. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. The truth had been revealed. But what came next would matter just as much. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Not harsh, not cold, just present. For the first time since arriving on the mountain, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like something had finally been heard. Spring came slowly to Mercer Ridge. Snow didn't vanish all at once. It loosened its grip in stages. The hard white edges softened, sank, and pulled back into the earth. Patches of dark soil appeared beneath the trees. Meltwater traced quiet paths down the slope, gathering into thin streams that whispered across stone. The cabin stood through it all, unchanged, but not the same. Dylan stepped out onto the porch one morning as the sun broke clean over the ridge for the first time in weeks. Light moved across the clearing in long golden lines, touching the wood, the ground, the trees, as if testing whether the place would accept it. Coda trotted ahead into the grass where snow had finally cleared, his paws silent on the damp earth. He paused, lifted his head, and breathed in deeply. No tension, no warning, just air. Dylan leaned against the railing, one hand resting on the worn wood his grandmother had touched for years. "They're not coming back," he said quietly. Coda glanced over, then continued forward, circling the clearing with a calm, measured pace. It had been weeks since the confrontation in Pine Hollow. Weeks since the truth had broken open, and things had changed. Not overnight, but steadily. State investigators had arrived within days, moving through the town with quiet authority. Records had been taken, statements gathered, old land agreements pulled into light that hadn't touched them in decades. Wade Brannon hadn't returned to the cabin. Neither had his son. The SUV was gone. The presence that once pressed against the edges of the property had faded, not erased, but no longer in control. Dylan stepped off the porch and walked toward the woodshed, where the hatch remained hidden beneath a careful cover of leaves and soil. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. What was buried there had already done its job. Coda returned to his side, brushing lightly against his leg, before sitting. Dylan looked down at him. "You've been busy," he said. Coda's tail moved once, slow and steady. The dog had changed too, not in what he was, but in how he carried it. The tension that had once driven every movement had softened. The sharp edge of constant alertness had eased into something quieter. Watchful, but at peace. Dylan nodded. "Yeah," he murmured. "Me too." He turned back toward the cabin. The front door stood open now. Not abandoned, inviting. Inside, the space had shifted. The dust was gone. The furniture had been cleaned, repaired where it needed it. The old table remained in its place, but now it held something new. Papers organized neatly, notebooks, a small radio, a kettle warming slowly over the fire. Life, not preserved, living. Footsteps approached from the path leading down the ridge. Dylan glanced up. A small group made their way toward the clearing. 2 men carrying lumber, a woman with a box of supplies, another man dragging what looked like a rolled-up carpet behind him. They weren't strangers anymore. The town had begun to come up the mountain. Not all at once, not easily, but one by one. Curiosity at first, then something else. Repair. Acknowledgement. The woman reached the edge of the clearing and waved. "Morning, Dylan," she called. He nodded. "Morning." They moved naturally now, without hesitation, crossing onto the property as if it had always been open to them. Coda stood, watching them approach. No growl, no warning, just attention. The men set the lumber down near the side of the cabin. "Figured we'd fix that back wall," one of them said. "Looks like it took a hit from the weather." Dylan followed his gaze. The wood near the rear had been damaged over the years, small cracks, weakened joints. Nothing critical, but enough. "Appreciate it," Dylan said. The man nodded. "Least we can do." The words carried more than they said. Dylan understood. The woman stepped forward, holding out the box. "Some supplies," she said. "Coffee, canned goods, a few things you might need." Dylan hesitated for a second, then took it. "Thank you." She smiled. Not forced, not careful, just real. Coda moved closer, sniffing the edge of the box before stepping back, satisfied. The group got to work quickly, moving around the cabin with quiet purpose. Tools came out, boards were measured, nails driven. The sound of rebuilding echoed through the clearing, not loud, not chaotic, steady, intentional. Dylan stepped back toward the porch, watching them. For years, this place had stood apart, isolated. Now, it was being brought back, not as it had been, but as something new. Coda settled beside him again, lowering himself onto the wood, his head resting between his paws. Dylan looked down. "You did good," he said quietly. The dog's ears flicked. Dylan reached down, scratching behind them gently. "Couldn't have done it without you." Coda leaned into the touch. The afternoon passed with quiet movement. Repairs were made. The clearing filled with voices, not loud, not overwhelming, but present. Children came later, following their parents. their laughter cutting through the mountain air in a way that felt unfamiliar at first, then natural. Coda moved among them carefully, measured, allowing the attention, accepting it, but always aware, always watching. Dylan stood near the edge of the clearing as the sun began to lower again, casting long shadows across the ground. The ridge stretched out before him, the same view his grandmother had seen, the same land she had protected. He rested his hands on the railing once more, breathing in, letting it settle. Behind him, the cabin was no longer silent. It was alive. Voices, movement, purpose. Dylan exhaled slowly. "We're home," he said. The words didn't feel strange. They didn't feel forced. They felt right. Coda stood beside him, pressing gently against his leg. The mountain didn't answer. It didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing left waiting in the shadows. Only what came next. If you believe standing your ground still matters, type yes in the comments, or drop a 1 if you would have done the same. And if stories like this mean something to you, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more real ones coming your way.